Greetings, seekers of truth and understanding. I have a brilliant guest lined up today, an astute independent thinker based in South Africa. So it's a fascinating, open-ended conversation in prospect. But before we get started, can I remind you to support this channel? If it's possible, just go to patreon.com, search for me by name and sign up. The instructions are there. You get early access to all my content, exclusive access to some content, including a question and answer session. It's all in the notes. Follow it through. Costs about the same as a cup of coffee every month. Anyway, it's now time to get started on that chat. Let's go. Hi everyone, great to have you with me today. It's a conversation with a very dear friend of mine, Nick Hudson, based in South Africa. In the great sorting of people, of voices over the last few years, for me, Nick has remained very constant in that he's continued to speak his mind, challenge narratives, not just the official narrative, but he takes on ideas and puts his own opinion and take on them out there. He'll be familiar to a lot of you from Panda, pandemics and data analytics. But he's so much more than that, a philosopher he is, as far as I'm concerned. Good day to you, Nick Hudson.
Great to be chatting again, Neil.
I don't think it's giving anything away really, to say that when we exchanged some brief messages before embarking on this conversation, you happened to point out that you were, I think, quote, increasingly unmoved by current events. And I read that and I felt myself releasing a sigh of relief because I think the analogy I would use is that for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been, courtesy of current events, on a non-stop diet of fast food, which is full of bad things that are bad for me. You can live on it, but it's not good for you. And the thought of metaphorically, conversationally, getting back to some real whole food makes my heart sing.
Yeah, the rule of thumb that I have increasingly adopted over decades, really 30 years, is that if it's a big story in the media, then it's more or less, you can assume it's false. It's a rule of thumb, not a sort of an ironclad law of nature. But if attention is being drawn to something in an extreme way, you're basically being misled. That's kind of the rule that I have lived by almost for 30 years. The distraction, the amount of complete falsehood that tumbles out of televisions and newspapers on a daily basis is extreme. And I think you're well served if you know that if something's being brought to your attention in an extreme way, then you need to almost just ignore it, just get away from it. Look for what's really happening in the world. And this is true for the COVID event. It's true for the Russia-Ukraine saga. It's true for Israel-Gaza. It's true for climate change. Anything.
You mentioned, Nick, that you had, off the back of that you had some, I don't know, even coping strategies or philosophical approaches that you felt were helpful to you and that might be helpful to others. So I'm keen to develop that because I feel a desperate need to invite myself to see past the trees and get to the wood again. I feel, as you point out, that the way in which we're bombarded with a deluge, a raging torrent, a whirling hurricane of current events that's always delivered with an air of panic around it is debilitating. And I wonder if you could sort of develop the idea of the ways that you've developed and that you continue to develop to see beyond it.
Well, I mean, look, my main strategies that really started in the mid-90s was I stopped consuming television news and, in fact, television in general. So I've been a very selective watcher. Occasionally somebody will recommend a series and we'll get down to watching it. And if we enjoy it, we'll bludgeon our way through. I watch the occasional movie, but apart from that, I just stay away from television, especially television news. And it's really the same when it comes to newspapers and magazines. I just have found that there's no value to be gained in reading a daily newspaper, no matter who's publishing it. Um, the emphasis is all distorted, and the content is so often, if not outright false, then misrepresented by way of irrational emphasis or perspective, being shown from one perspective only. And then there's just a huge amount of waffle. It's just not interesting what happened to the share price of Apple yesterday and what somebody's opinion of the driver of that share price movement was. And that's a lot of your business junk. And the things that are left out, the omissions, are enormous. We don't get to hear the true story of how central banks operate and who benefits from their operations. We don't get to hear the true story of the censorship campaigns and the discovered misinformation by governments and supranational organizations. So I stopped in the mid-90s consuming that stuff. I run a business. I run a private equity fund. It's absolutely liberating to be free from that cacophony. It doesn't tell you anything about how to navigate the world.
It's been suggested to me by more than one voice that I regard as credible that the intensity of the hurricane in recent times is down to the fact that there are emerging or emergent factors that are one way or another beyond the control of the groups, that we imagine hold sway, hold Machiavellian control over everything. That out of their sight or as unintended consequences of some of their actions or whatever, that there are elements that they don't control that explain, why so much intensity was applied to recent events to distract us from something that they don't know how to cope with. Do you think there's anything in that?
Yeah, completely. I think the fundamental reality is that complex systems cannot be managed, cannot be managed with any kind of pinpoint accuracy. So there are emergent effects that are unpredictable. And if you know that those are going to be there, then yes, drowning them out might well be a strategy. And I think to an extent, we've been palpably sort of aware of these things having a strange tendency to arrive just when they're needed. Just as some scandal is breaking or about to break, something else floods the void to distract everybody's attention from the what's been exposed or what has emerged and is starting to take a hold in the public imagination. There's almost a displacement, an active displacement that takes place. I mean, many people regarded the timing and the way in which the Ukraine conflict landed on the map as one such example, distracting from the emergent horrors of the mandates for COVID and so on. Just as people were beginning to become skeptical and to apply a fair amount of attention to rethinking their positions on the COVID narrative, another huge distraction comes in.
For you, is freedom still there? We're told all the time, I'm part of it. I voice my fears about loss of freedom of speech, increasing censorship, long-term intentions to control movement of people, or certainly to monitor movement of people in intensely detailed ways. But do you think in reality that for those of us that want to be left alone, really, that don't want that level of scrutiny, do you think that freedom is still there? Are we just being tricked into thinking that others have more control over us than they actually do?
Look, I feel the net encroaching. I find that there's really no platform on which I can uh, provide an opinion that has any chance of reach. So social media, shadow banning, and minimization of reach is still alive and kicking. The idea that Twitter or X has become a free speech platform now is completely false. There's massive censorship of anything that's outside of this Overton window. Accounts who really should be attracting a lot of attention and being promoted a lot, and I'm not only referring to my own, but people who are doing exceptional work, uncovering amazing things, find themselves relentlessly censored and shadow banned if they are not fitting within the margins of the Overton window. That's very noticeable for me. I am staggered at how effective it all still is. And then on the movement side, I think everybody who, like me, has a regular diet of international travel for business and pleasure reasons will agree that travel is becoming less and less pleasant, more and more expensive, more and more frustrating. So I do feel that there is an encroachment. And I noticed that on my plane tickets, there's a little space provided for the data about the amount of carbon dioxide I'm consuming on this flight. And I wonder where that's heading to. I noticed that my bank is trying to persuade me to allow them to calculate my carbon footprint. Of course, I won't comply with that. But I do have a sense of freedoms being chipped away. And I do have a sense of some urgency being needed in the fight back.
How is that fight to be carried to the opposition? There was so much excitement in advance of the Trump administration, and for me, I mean, I'll go first and say that I'm really only disappointed by what has manifested so far. I don't see that as having been the return to the kind of freedoms that I would like to have seen and that I felt that America might take the lead on. And if not there, where will the help come from? I mean, I'm not saying that we should sit back and wait to be rescued, but we need platforms where we can freely exchange ideas. Be it decentralized, peer to peer, whatever. But we need something that isn't there. Do you in the circles that you move in and the people that you talk to offline, do you have any sense of there being a rebel alliance that means more than just hot air and angry talk?
It's very difficult to sort of reach a conclusion that some alliance has been formed. But what I do notice is just a change in people's perceptions of recent events. Certainly when it comes to the COVID phenomenon, there are the diehards who believe that everything was done for good reason and that governments were looking after their best interests. But for the most part, I find that people are pretty open to engaging regarding what went wrong and what lies we were fed. I do have a sort of a sense of a gradual opening up to the idea of at least reassessing that period. There are the diehards. There's no question. You do meet those people who will be lining up for the next shot, not questioning anything, who believe that SARS-CoV-2 was a deadly virus and COVID a deadly disease. But I think a lot of people have considerably revised their opinions, and certainly here in South Africa, nobody is taking a booster shot. That's gone. So by their actions, people have called bullshit on the entire enterprise there. I wasn't disappointed by the outcomes of the Trump administration so far because I wasn't expecting much. To me, we get offered candidates who are going to comply with the bulk of the nonsense of climate change, infectious diseases and pandemics, central banking, these conflicts that are so obviously staged and manipulated. No candidate who stood against those things had any chance of finding himself in primary. So you're always going to get a regime just with a slightly different gloss, but where when it comes to all of the substantive issues in the world, they will do nothing different. So I was not expecting a whole lot. I've been probably pleasantly surprised to the positive by a couple of things. I note Jay Bhattacharya talking about well, it looks as if they will be talking about the removal of the COVID-19 vaccines for pregnant women and children. That's an interesting move. I understand that 11 states in the United States are launching actions to ban mRNA platform injections altogether. How far that goes, we'll see. But there have been these sort of events that I wasn't expecting to see. So that's good. But as I say, I came from a very I went maybe even cynical point of view about the utility of democracy and the functionality of democracy in the Western world.
Yeah, one of the great lessons for me over the last while, I think I hadn't learned it really because I hadn't paid attention to the reality of it. That that democracy, as we've been presented with it in the West, is bogus.
Totally.
The way in which, and I made the same assumptions that the decision of the majority was the right one. I look back at how long I thought that way and just blush internally, at least. So democracy is utterly bogus. It's a non concept, and I wonder when you look from, let's say, your perspective in the Deep South, when you look at Europe and taking in Britain, how surprised are you by the continuing anti-human, destructive direction of travel there?
I can't say I'm surprised. I would have been surprised if you'd told me this is how it was going to be 6 years ago. I've swallowed a few Red Bulls, along the way. But there's a sort of a civilizational decay aspect to all of this, and it's the way I heard it expressed once was that in the waning phases of empire, the bureaucrats have taken over from the innovators, the creators, the builders, and they will stifle the lateral thinkers. The linear thinkers take over and stifle the lateral thinkers. And I think this great impetus towards control and centralization is a manifestation of that kind of phenomenon. You've got people rising to positions of power who are of that kind of narrow-minded, small-minded type, who think that they can control the world and run it through a spreadsheet, and that if only everybody would listen to their plans and their designs, the world would just be perfect. It's a deeply immature and perspective, and one that's been refuted by history through the millennia. But it is a feature of, I think, of societies that have gone past their peaks and are on the way down.
I think Europe is done.
Yes.
I think you talk about civilizational decline. I think that has passed the point of no return. I think the same of Britain.
Sadly so, yes.
Where do you see the sun rising? If the sun is setting,
Yeah,
where should we look for the new dawn?
I see a bit of a new dawn in Eastern Europe, and it'll be interesting to see whether there's a reaction to that from the sort of NATO corners, whether there's some attempt to destabilize that region. Many people point to the Ukraine conflict as perhaps being one of those. But it's certainly seems to me to be the case that as far as large populations of people who are based in a sense that they're deeply skeptical of a lot of these large scale staged narratives. I think Eastern Europe is very, very well represented. There's also a skepticism in Africa, but the problem is that poverty prevents people from spending too much time thinking about the rest of the world. And by and large, if you're an African, you have to hustle. But when it comes to the sharp edge of these campaigns, we saw how, for example, Africans comprehensively rejected the COVID vaccines. It was a staggering rejection. So those to me would be the bright parts. I would love to be able to say something similar about Asia, but I just don't feel that I've had enough time on the ground and enough exposure to people who are reporting on what the real conditions on the ground are. But it's possible that there would be places there, and maybe also in South America. I mean, we are talking about a decline of the old Anglo-Saxon colonies and Western Europe and North America. And I agree with you, the European and UK decline is past the point of no return. I think the road ahead is going to be incredibly rocky for those places, and I'm deeply saddened by it. I feel, even though I'm 3 generations removed from my most recent ancestors who were born in Europe, and probably as many as 8 generations from the most distant African-born generations. So I'm quite removed from Europe, but I do still feel a tethering to, let's call it Western civilization, as we might have understood it as a term 25 years ago. The music, the architecture, the concepts of aesthetic beauty, of morality, of tradition, those are close to my heart. And so it's with a great deal of pain that I look at Europe and perceive its now inevitable destruction.
I think it's so instructive to be confronted with how readily something that seemed permanent is actually a gossamer covering, the thinnest sheet thrown over perpetual chaos.
Yeah.
Western civilization, all that we think about, you've listed some of it, and yet within my lifetime, we've seen it undone. Yeah. And it's very important to realise that, because there will be a new dawn somewhere, and it will probably have within it some of the same thinking that once underpinned Western civilization. We call it Western civilization, but I think notions of freedom and justice, and equality before the law and all the rest of it, they will surely be folded within the civilization that rises wherever civilization rises, wherever the new dawn comes. But it's so instructive to know that it's always fragile. It doesn't matter if it lasts for 10 years or 1,000 years. Without due care and attention, it can be swept away like chalk off of a blackboard.
Yes.
And you mentioned Africa. I'm increasingly fascinated. I've spent some time in southern Africa, particularly, not just South Africa, but southern Africa. And I watched with great interest, for example, what's been happening in Burkina Faso. The rise of this figure, Ibrahim Traore. Now, whoever he is, whatever his motivations are, whatever his ideology, the way in which it's simply infuriated France, and then by extension much of the West, that anyone in Africa and or an African country should say, enough with you. We don't want anything more to do with you. I'm not holding Ibrahim Traore up as some kind of, the Messiah that he's being held up as. It's neither here nor there. The fact is, as soon as an African country turns away, however that manifests itself, from the West, they're just to be crushed. And it's still happening in real time, that determination to say, no. You will continue to be the teat that the West sucks on, and the rest of you can just
Yeah, I
take
mean,
the consequences.
you point to some very important and realities. My perspective on South Africa's change in regime 12 years ago, which many people have forgotten about, was really that it was infused with the sense that the leader at the time, President Zuma, was turning away from the West and starting to look at, for example, working with Russians to build up a nuclear power station and not getting on board with the whole renewable energy malarkey. He was a traditionalist, an African leader who was deeply conservative, reflecting the tenor of many South African communities. South Africans are by and large a conservative lot. And his removal, was a massive media circus highlighting various aspects of corruption, which in the broader scheme of things are no different from the replacement regime's corruption. In fact, the replacement regime is even worse. And so, I see it, the manipulation of polities in African countries. But there is a point where control is lost. I've just returned from a trip to Zimbabwe a couple of months ago, and that's a country which I absolutely adore from a natural environment perspective. I was up in the exquisitely beautiful highlands of Zimbabwe doing some bird watching. They've got a whole range of endemic species there that you can see nowhere else. And it's unspeakably beautiful in those forests. But all around me, I was aware of the Wild West nature of that country right now. The official economy is nothing, and the unofficial economy is huge. There's illegal mining and a great deal of money laundering going on, and it's pretty unattractive stuff to look at. I mean, you're seeing the absolute devastation environmentally where this lithium mining and gold mining is taking place. And the people who are pressed into labor, the young men pressed into laboring on these awful, ungodly facilities. I mean, they really are apocalyptic visions. So it's very difficult to behold. But what you see there is really something that I think becomes at a point past controlling an entire illicit economy that's outside of the confines and constructs of the central banks and the manipulations of political pressure and so on. And maybe we see more of that, but that's not to speak about something that is without its terrible depravities and vices. I mean, this is very difficult stuff. But it certainly does speak to a degree of loss of control. And I think the South African economy is also not too dissimilar in many ways. There's an enormous kind of dark economy that is not easily subjected to control.
Is that just inevitable? Is that,
I think
I can remember when I was coming and going from South Africa regularly. People used to insist that there was this kind of like TAB thing. That's Africa, baby. That was the response to anything you pointed out that seemed incomprehensible. It was just a shrug. Is there an inevitability, or has it been the consequence of Western abuse, colonial abuse, and is there any possibility that with the rise of a multipolar world, with BRICS and with other nations in other parts of the world paying attention to Africa, is there any hope that just a different perspective coming in will create something different, or will it just perpetuate that sense of no, there's always an uncontrolled, unregulated chaos here?
Well, I think what would be required for Africa to begin to really advance and progress would be an end to the neocon interference, because the abuse, people like to blame the colonial era for the poverty and conflict in Africa. But it's really the post-colonial intervention that has done the most damage, in my opinion. The neocon perspective is really that Africa is resource rich, and we need those resources to remain available to us and to be cheap. And so we can't afford to have an ascendant African economy. It needs to be contained and suppressed. And it would require a sort of collapse of that thinking and an end to the numerous policies and interventions that perpetuate this kind of undermining of African sovereignty and stability. And I do see that neocon worldview being challenged. And it is possible that a multipolar world would make it harder for that set of policies and that philosophy to be perpetuated. I certainly hope so.
Do you think, is there any hope, if hope's the right word, that we are on the cusp of paradigm shifting, new era style change?
Yes.
Do you think, and that, I suppose by definition, it almost makes it impossible to look into the crystal ball and see what it might be, because it might be something that we've never seen before. But it does feel, sort of dawning of the age of Aquarius, it does feel as if we're moving out of some kind of 2000 year or whatever era, and that something new must come. And sometimes there's a sense of expectation about it, that it must come.
Yes, I'm very much in that camp. I should say at this point that I'm an optimist. I really look forward to new things. It's that bittersweet aspect of all of this, where you feel like you're saying goodbye to an old friend that you know you're never going to see again. But at the same turn, I do feel that there are strong grounds for optimism, and maybe I should just expand on that a little bit. Centralization is a doomed project. It will collapse. Any centralization represents, by necessity, the end of progress and creativity. It represents, by necessity, decay and destruction. Any attempts to control complex systems are bound to fail. And this situation is no exception. In the same way that the Soviet Union's economic plans floundered and ultimately had to be abandoned, the dreams of the globalists, the dreams of central control, will also be abandoned. And that's without question. This notion at this time is different because we have AI or information that the Soviets lacked, and therefore we are going to be able to launch a new dirigist project that will be successful where prior efforts failed. That idea is false, because it's not for lack of information that centralized systems fail. It's for lack of knowledge of how to manage the systems. You can have as many data points as you want about a complex system, but without a governing theory of how to navigate that complexity, which you can never have, those centralizing projects are doomed to fail. So there is going to be a collapse in the globalist order. The question is how much damage is done and who gets taken out on the way down. And smart people will be applying their minds to how they make sure that they will not be among the casualties. But yes, a new age, a new flourishing will be at the end of it all. And these things are not, it's not all boats sinking and all boats rising. There will be a lot of movements in opposite directions, and we must look to collapses of the past to understand how the fading of empire was accompanied by emergent flourishing. I love looking back at the Roman Empire. I studied Latin the whole way through school, and as a result of that, became a sort of lifelong consumer of the history of the Roman Empire. And the collapse of the Western Empire and the various subsets of collapse, the particularly interesting one for me being the collapse of Magna Britannica, the basic retreat of civilization from the British Isles. For me, they're fascinating stories, and they're not linear declines. They take centuries. Eventually, Hadrian's Wall is abandoned, and nobody is standing sentry anymore, and the garrisons have had to, by necessity, because they stopped being paid, dissipated onto both sides of the wall to begin life without the empire. You can see the sort of the points, those poignant moments when hot and cold running water stops being a thing, and the signs of collapse and of decay, and they're very poignant stories. But I think there's a lot of unwritten history of the opportunities created by the absence of the stranglehold. And we might not read about them because they didn't form empires overnight. These are the stories of towns and hamlets freed from the shackles and taxes of the empire, beginning to flourish and beginning to create. And maybe those histories are not as salient as the stories of the empires in decline. But I believe that those histories are there, and that those of us who see through the program of globalists' centralized control and the end of personal freedoms and freedom of speech under those regimes will be among the people who found the new empire.
I think that the at the centre of the Roman Empire in decline, that Christianity, really, I suppose, the Catholic Church and the Vatican was really the perpetuation of the imperium. I think the people that saw that something that had been working for centuries, if not a millennium, it had run its course. And I think the new suit of clothes that the powerful donned in order to perpetuate their power while enabling the illusion that the empire was gone was the rise of the Christendom. I think Christendom under the Catholic Church was just the Roman Empire playing a new game, but with the same with a lot of the same intent. But I wonder if the new era requires an opening up to humility. I feel that I wonder at the technocrats, the people who preach artificial intelligence, which I don't actually have a problem with artificial intelligence. I just think that there's a necessary humility. I think along the way, there is no awe about humanity anymore. All of the awe is apportioned to technology and everything that isn't human, as though humanity has had its day, has to be upgraded or be discarded. Hence transhumanism and all of the rest of it. I would when you talk about, there is a humility inherent in accepting complexity. There's an arrogance in imagining that you can centralize and run from the top and apply simple solutions, global solutions. That's arrogant.
I absolutely agree with you. Those linear thinking bureaucrats are too stupid to be humble. That's the reality. And I have such an interesting life as a private equity investor because I get to interact all the time. And I'm a mid-market private equity investor, so I get to engage with entrepreneurs and creators, designers, innovators all the time, and they're wonderful people. And what they have in common is indeed this kind of humility that you point towards. It's a very pronounced feature of that type of person. And I often find myself explaining that the CEOs of the businesses that I work with are very, very different from the CEOs of listed companies, of large corporations in general. Those people are your pointy-headed bureaucrats, the people who have no concept of innovation and generativity, by and large. There are exceptions, obviously, the founders who've stayed in control long enough to carry on running those large firms. But by and large, the people who run the listed companies in America or in South Africa or in the UK are a thoroughly unimaginative, compliant, bureaucratic bunch. And they actually can't even conceive of what innovation involves, of what creativity involves. And so it's a really real visceral experience for me is just noting the stark contrast between the humility of the people who do have to engage with complexity and the continuing battle to solve the problems on the margins that are presented by real world events as opposed to the constructed narratives. The CEOs of these large firms are spending a whole lot of their time these days solving non-problems or artificial problems. Problems like climate change and DEI and that ESG and that kind of thing. An inordinate amount of energy goes into solving non-problems. And it's just amazing. I am just so fortunate to spend a great deal of my time with people who live in the real world and who are actually solving real problems that benefit real customers and real suppliers and real employees. That's a
What kind
remarkably
of
privileged
what
position to
kind of
occupy.
when you talk about these innovators, entrepreneurs, business people, you describe them as mid-range. Give us a sense of the kind of areas that these people are in. What kind of problems are they addressing? What complexities, in their humble way, are they addressing and profiting within by being creative and humble?
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of the problems would sound totally mundane to a consumer of media narratives. There are always these sexy ideas that capture the media narrative. You'll hear about software as a service or the renewables, a renewable energy industry. You'll hear about AI and there's kind of a mystique, an aura that develops around these big ideas. But the real problems of real businesses are far more mundane. AI may be a tool that can be used to solve some of them, but for the most part, human ingenuity is required. You're facing the reality, for example, that I often point to is that strategy is never about a big vision. Strategy is never about one big, hairy, audacious goal, as they like to refer to it in the business textbooks. It's never about what the retired CEO writes in his memoirs, which is a kind of revisionist history of his personal life. The reality is that you face daunting complexity. You can't even trace the real problems to their root cause. You have to try and experiment on the margins with different tactics and ideas. And what you find is that some of them work and some of them don't. And the strategically agile firm moves off the ideas that don't work very quickly, doesn't get irrationally attached to one CEO's grand plan. And then they persist with the ideas and flood more capital into the ideas that work well. And that's the reality of the small and medium enterprise, which is where almost all of the economic and technological progress in the world is found. You don't get innovation coming out of massive international banks or manufacturing and packaging firms. Those are horrible, stodgy, unprogressive places. You get progress in small business. And when the small businesses are acquired by the big businesses, that's the end of their progress.
So in what areas?
I can give you examples, but it's just I'd bore listeners to death with the mundanity of it. It's exciting to the people who are involved in the businesses because they get a feedback, a reward. It's like their dopamine hit, if you like, is watching their business flourish and being able to cut a price or produce more with less or do something like that. But the efficiency improvements in our waste processing plant are very arcane matters, but wondrous when you're on the board or on the management team that's hitting the home runs as a result of those improvements.
I just wondered if there were any, if there were any examples of fields or areas in which you're seeing this kind of entrepreneurial innovation? Is there any kind of unifying,
No, I mean,
or is it
it's
just a complete smorgasbord of ideas?
Neil. The reality, we have as a mantra in our firm that we just stay away from anything that's sexy, because all that happens to sexy industries is that prices get disconnected from value. And so if it's a hot topic, if there's a lot of attention being applied in media to a particular industry, just stay away from it, because you won't be able to do sensible deals at sensible prices. Opportunity is everywhere, and the ability to continue progressing is everywhere. I'll give you an example. I had to take a close look at the South African wine industry on the way into one of our transactions, which processes waste from the wine industry. And what I learned in that investigation absolutely floored me. Over 100 years, there has been a continual 1% per annum improvement in efficiency in the wine industry in South Africa. And it's not a rate that has declined over time. It's a stable 1%.
That's 100% over 100 years. No, or is my arithmetic wrong?
Totally. You got to go 0.99 to the power of 100, right? But the output of wine per hectare basically improves at 1% a year, and there's no end to it. And that's because the set of problems is infinite. Solving one problem simply frees you up to move on to the next one, and it frees you up to perceive the new problem. Very often people don't even know what the problems are until they've solved intermediate ones that enable them to shine a light on a new set of problems. So there are always problems out there to be solved. The set of soluble problems is unbounded, it's infinite. And every single industry at every single place in time has a great vista of unsolved problems before it. And I use the word problem in a very positive way. A problem is something that makes life interesting. Without problems, life is not worth living. That's kind of how I see the world. And we are, wherever you are, you can buy a business in any industry, take away the trappings of centralization, and make a fortune, because what you're doing is freeing that enterprise up to solve problems again. And big companies make it impossible to do that. So we regard the acquisition, they're called carve-out transactions. We regard carve-out transaction, the acquisition of divisions from listed companies, as being like shooting fish in a barrel, because you don't have to do anything brilliant. You just have to stop doing the terribly stupid things. And these stupid things are they're holy cows in large corporations. They're regarded as best practice. You hear this term everywhere. And best practice, at the moment I hear that somebody's saying, yes, we do this because it's best practice, I smell opportunity. I start rubbing my hands together, because it's just going to be another narrative, another just so story of why something should be run. And when you scratch why something should be run in a particular way, and when you pick at that thing and scratch at that thing, you will find that it's completely without substance.
It sounds as though the picture you're painting in my head is that a centralized megacorp is wearing oven gloves, and it's only when you take off the oven gloves that the dexterity comes back, that
Yes.
even makes it possible to contemplate fixing fiddly little things. Because if you're wearing oven gloves, all you can do is pick up hot things and move them around.
I love that analogy. That describes it incredibly well. You receive a management team, the divisional team of this this business that you're buying out of a listed company, and when they arrive, they've got those mittens on, and you reach over and take them off. That's exactly what it's about. So you referred to me as a philosopher, and you're right. I do spend a lot of time indulging in deep thinking. But I have this unusual life where I get to implement philosophy, and I do it in the world of business. And it's my joy. I absolutely just get a kick. No matter how many times I do it, of taking a business stripping away the stupid incentives, the stupid management practices. And these things are legion. There are so many practices in business that have no beneficial effect whatsoever, and many of them are regarded as best practice. They're harmful practices, and they're practices which no entrepreneur would indulge in unless forced to. So yeah, it's your description is apt.
I was paying a lot of attention this week to, well, there's probably more than one way to interpret what happened, but, well, inevitably there is. But the sacking of the boss of the Copyright Office at the behest of the Donald Trump administration, and there's speculation that well, someone has noticed that it came very quickly after that office submitted a report asking questions about the freedom that artificial intelligence should or should not have to strip from the internet without restraint, ignoring copyright on content, on ideas. And it did seem a bit draconian that a report that was acknowledging the transformative potential of artificial intelligence, but saying, but we have to protect the creative industries, because you can't just let someone create and then strip their idea and use it in the marketplace to their detriment. It's not fair. Which seemed like a perfectly reasonable point to make. But I wondered more broadly, it got me, I'm always thinking about artificial intelligence at the moment. And there's a quote that haunts me. That a wise man said that we're living inside the body of a whale. There's been plenty to eat, but only because there was a whale. And that whale is the acquired wisdom of humankind. I don't know, since the cave paintings in Lascaux and Altamira, there's been this accretion of wisdom. And the AI has already cannibalized all of it and wants the freedom to keep doing that. And that disconnect from the needs of the creative entrepreneurial people seems to me existential.
That's interesting.
You need to, whatever artificial intelligence can do, absolutely you need to protect and coddle and blow oxygen onto the creatives. Otherwise there will be no more whale.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, maybe by way of background, a bit of scene setting on AI. I've promoted the view that AI is a misnomer, that it's neither artificial nor intelligent, and that automation would be a much better descriptor for anything that masquerades under the label of AI. Certainly in the boardroom, when I'm trying to get companies to think the right way about the opportunity set created by the advent of these models, these automation models, I do really insist on people talking about automation, because that's what it is. So I think these notions of the emergence of sentient machines, of general intelligence spontaneously emerging out of these programs, is nonsense. We don't understand the nature of creativity. We have no algorithm that can mimic it. And I don't think we're in danger of such an algorithm being invented anytime soon. So when it comes to creativity in general, I think that's a market that is not going to receive competition from AIs. They're not going to start being creative in the true sense of the word.
But if you allow artificial intelligence, an author creates a book, or a filmmaker creates a film, or an inventor comes up with something that ought to be protected by patent. If you don't, why would a singer-songwriter write a song?
So then you're talking about theft. You're not talking about intelligence. If you made it legal for a person to go and do that, to go and steal a song, steal a person's writing, then we wouldn't be saying, "Oh, the problem is that that Neil who stole the writing is intelligent." The problem is that Neil is a thief. And so, yes, if the machine is is stealing the material, then the problem is that the people who designed the machine are thieves. You see, they've not inserted into their machinery a prevention from this machine stealing from people. So if I had a drone that was programmed to go around and pinch people's wallets from their dining room tables or their restaurant handbags or whatever, we wouldn't go around saying, "Oh, look at this evil drone." We'd say the person who's told the drone to go and steal that wallet is the problem. And I don't think that the designers of machines that steal or murder should be at all exempt from blame for the murders and stealing. And that's the kind of important ethical thinking that needs to go around AI. Instead, we get this ridiculous quantity of effort going into arguing about whether we should control AI so that we prevent the singularity, the day when the AI emerges as able to be sentient, generally intelligent, and with emergent volition and features like that, human features. I think that project is a complete waste of time, that they will never come. And we should instead be talking about what the consequences are for people who automate stealing and murder.
I think from our conversation today, Nick, I think what I take away is, and what I'm encouraged by, if not enthused by, if I'm reading you right, hearing you right, is that your optimism comes from embracing complexity, wanting more and more complexity, actually.
Yes.
Getting more and more granular about just how complicated things are. And that pessimism or despair lies in contemplating, even for a moment, that there's a simple solution, to the world.
You're absolutely right. I mean, for me, complexity is the stuff of awe. It's the beauty is always emergent from complex things. The world as a machine is a terrible construct. This idea of the atoms bouncing off atoms and all causes being written in the deep history of time. That's a very pernicious kind of mindset, and it is the mindset of the would-be globalist totalitarian. This idea that the world can behave like some kind of intricate machine. But it's not at all representative of reality, and all the interesting things in the world are complex, and there's no end to the voyage of discovery as you engage with that complexity, whether you're doing it in the world of business or on your hands and knees in a forest trying to understand the ecosystem. The joy is the same, and it's a perspective and understanding that is very edifying. It's food for the soul.
The arrogance I find, or that I see in imagining the singularity and thinking that coordinated computers are going to get there to consciousness anytime soon. I find that breathtaking. To me, the reality of consciousness is just this. What's going on inside your brain, my brain at any given moment is just amorphous chaos with momentary glimpses of something that we can focus on. It's all probabilities and possibilities and potential. And as somebody said, if our brains were simple enough to understand, we'd be too stupid to understand them.
Correct. Correct.
You have to embrace that impossible complexity that you're just simply never going to see it all and understand it all. And the moment you do that, it's like the Socratic idea that he was the smartest man in Athens because he alone had embraced the idea that he knew nothing. And the oracle at Delphi said that makes him the smartest man.
That makes him the smartest man, exactly. I agree with both of those kind of analogies that you bring up there. For me, when I think about how consciousness must have evolved, I look at it and I say, there was this gradual accretion of systems and and structures and the assembly of information that's taken place over the course of billions of years, subject to pressures and tests of dazzling dimensionality. And it's even difficult to describe what consciousness is, let alone to mimic it or to create it artificially. I think for precisely this reason, it's the complexity from which it emerged is beyond description. And that's why I'm fairly confident in my statement that we will never get to a situation where we are able to algorithmically program true creativity. I feel that it'll be impossible to simulate that that's evolutionary soup, if you like. To model it would require a computer the size of the universe almost, and we will never have one of those. Any attempt to abstract from that complexity will take something important away, or risk taking something important away, so that you will not be able to simulate your way to a conscious entity in silico. That dazzling complexity is at the heart of it, and people who will not address it will never understand the limits and futility of the quest for general artificial intelligence.
I'm very pleased with that, Nick, and I think I've taken an hour of your time, busy entrepreneurial creative man that you are, and I'll be grateful for that, and I will look forward to another conversation in the future. But for now, Nick, that's been lovely for me.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for the conversation myself. It's always a pleasure talking with you, Neil. I really do enjoy it, and I hope that we've created something interesting for your listeners.